You're on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Matt Apuzzo still with us, reporter for the Associated Press, co-author of the AP report called Document Shows NYPD eyed Shiites Based on Religion. We were going to link to that at our website, democracynow.org. We're also joined by Imam Talib Abdur-Rashid, spiritual leader at the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood and a member of the Islamic Leadership Council of New York. Matt Apuzzo, I just wanted to go back to the issue of the CIA and the New York Police Department relationship. News recently, the CIA saying they did not approve this relationship, though a top official within the CIA, David Cohen, after September 11th, came to New York and worked high up became one of the top officials in the New York Police Department.
Right. So after 9/11, David Cohen, who is one of the top intelligence officers at the CIA, came to the NYPD as the head of intelligence, and one of the first things he did was, in collaboration with George Tenet, who was the CIA director, arranged for another CIA officer, Larry Sanchez, to come to New York. Now, it was a very murky arrangement. So George Tenet sent Larry Sanchez to New York as his personal representative. So he's still on CIA payroll. He is still still has a CIA badge. He starts the morning at the CIA station, reads all the intelligence, and then goes over to NYPD and shares it. And that is what I think, intelligence sharing is what is absolutely supposed to happen. And post 9/11, that was the focus. But I mean, what Larry also did was Larry was also the architect of a lot of these programs. I mean, New York was trying to figure out how are we gonna find these things? How are we gonna get the lead? How are we gonna get these leads? How are we gonna get these informants? Where are we gonna put our undercovers? And Larry was able to bring a lot of the expertise, and a lot of the officers that we've interviewed, said, Larry was invaluable in this, in helping us build these programs, reviewing our records, and now that's what we've sort of focused on, the CIA relationship. CIA has also trained an NYPD detective at the Farm, which is the spy school in Virginia. And then just most recently, there was another one of the most senior CIA officers in the country, went to New York on what the federal government called a management sabbatical. But what Ray Kelly said was information sharing. So we don't still really know what his job was there, but we do know it's ending early, 9 months into a one-year stint. So, and it sounds like from what David Petraeus said before Congress yesterday that that sort of relationship isn't going to continue. They're going to find some new way to collaborate and share information, but it doesn't sound like they're going to be sending anybody back.
Well, I'd like to bring the Imam into the conversation. Your reaction to this continued exposure of what the New York Police Department is doing in the Muslim community, not only in New York City, but up and down the East Coast.
Well, we're not surprised at all. Those of us who are familiar with the history of the NYPD, we know that there's been a long-standing tension, not just between the Muslim community, but between communities of peoples of color here in New York City. And we view these latest programs, the programs that are focused on Muslim New Yorkers, as being directly related to NYPD intelligence programs of the past, the Red Squads of the 1950s and 60s, focused in on political activists, except now, instead of just focusing on the political community, they're focusing on our religious community.
Have you experienced the surveillance at your mosque, at the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood, and also the fact that you're the president of the Islamic Leadership Group here in New York, what people are saying, other imams?
Yeah, other imams throughout the city. We are positive that they are on that list. We have lawyers in our community who've seen the list, and we know for a fact that there are mosques throughout the city that have been targeted under this program.
Well, one of the sentences in this report that the AP uncovered says FBI officials have suspected that the Alavi Foundation is using its Islamic centers as a means of penetrating the black Muslim community to recruit sympathizers. The Alavi Foundation being an association that has connections with the Iranian government. Yes. This effort to paint the black community as being infiltrated by foreign forces.
Well, of course, that's an old theme going all the way back to the 1930s. You know, government still doesn't get it, that the African-American community is capable of its own analysis of problems, capable of organizing itself as a community. When one looks at that document under Ancestries of Interest, which was one of the NYPD documents, African-Americans are the only American-born or indigenous group on that list. And the whole premise is a fallacy. The African Americans, we do not have any kind of history of terrorist activity in America, in spite of the circumstances under which we came here in the first place.
Matt Apuzzo, you are nodding your head. Talk more about that.
Yeah, so one of the documents that we were able to obtain along the way was their Ancestries of Interest. And the Imam's absolutely right. I mean, it's 28 countries, almost all of them are Muslim countries. And then American black Muslim. There clearly is a concern or a viewpoint at the NYPD about Muslim converts and about African American Muslims. One of the programs we uncovered along the way was the name change program. The NYPD basically they data mine everybody in New York who changes their name. And if you change your name, if I'm Matt Apuzzo and I change my name and I take the last name Muhammad, I'm going to get looked at. And if the Imam changes his name to Matt Apuzzo, he's going to get looked at, because the concern is, well, what is he trying to go undercover? Is he trying to go, is he going to try to obscure his identity? And the feeling on that was that, if somebody's taking a Muslim name, maybe they're becoming more religious, they're becoming, potentially more violent. And if they're Americanizing their name, just as generations of immigrants have done, if they're Americanizing their name, well, then maybe that Muslim is trying to avoid scrutiny and try to blend in. And so you'd get a background check, you'd get put in a police database, and depending on who was doing the analysis and at what time in the program this was, you might get a visit from the NYPD just to ask you about why you were changing your name.
Listening to this, this helps me to understand that one of the bases for this current activity is actually the 2007 NYPD report on so-called homegrown radicalization. And back then, the Muslim American Civil Liberties Coalition challenged many of the premises that are in that report as to how they identify, Muslims who are being quote-unquote radicalized. And they fought the coalition then, those of us in the Muslim community who were saying to them, this is not right. This gives the wrong impression. They smugly dismissed our criticisms now. Now we find out that they actually built programs based on these false premises in the first place.
Matt, I'd like to ask you just briefly, am I wrong, or have I been witnessing a increasing sort of division between the FBI and the New York Police Department? Several times that the New York Police Department has arrested so-called terrorist suspects, where the FBI has almost disdained them as real entrapment efforts, not real terrorism cases. Do you see a growing division between the FBI and the NYPD on these matters?
Well, there is a rift, but I mean, I actually think it gets a little bit, the rift between the NYPD and FBI is kind of a oversimplified thing. I mean, there is a rift between the FBI and the NYPD's intelligence division, but I actually think, this most recent case, the Pimentel case, I mean, I think that might be a case of just, some bruised egos on both sides. If the NYPD wants to bring a case that the FBI doesn't want to bring a case on, I mean, certainly the NYPD can bring a case. Now, the FBI, if they didn't want the case to be brought, they didn't bring it. I mean, if the FBI decides they want to, I mean, the NYPD decides they want to bring it, I mean, that in and of itself, I don't think is indicative of the rift. I mean, certainly there is a division between the Intel Division and the FBI in New York. But, you know, to the Imam's point, which is I think fascinating about, you know, the idea of, you know, about building these programs and how and what is effective policing. I mean, the Department of Homeland Security, I mean, Janet Napolitano and, you know, Barack Obama have talked about this very issue globally or nationally about how we're about what our best practice is for policing. And they're very eager to talk about it as long as you don't talk about New York. I mean, we have asked for months to try to talk to them about the NYPD's programs, which, you know, federal money finances, but the I mean, we can't get the Homeland Security Department to say, yeah, we're for this. This is what we want. We want this done in every city. Or, no, we're actually against that. We don't want it done in any city. Or, actually, we only want it done in New York. It does seem weird, right? I mean, if it's good practice, if this is good law enforcement, it should be replicated and put everywhere. And if it's not good law enforcement, then we certainly don't want it done in the city that is the biggest focus of international terrorism.
Imam.
Yes, you know, Amy and Juan, just a few weeks ago, there was, you did a program here on Democracy Now! In which you were highlighting the continued militarization of the police force in New York City and other major cities. And this is another example. A few years ago, under Mayor David Dinkins, he implemented a policy and approach that was called community policing. And of course, under the Giuliani administration, they moved away from community policing, and now here we are under the past decade under Mayor Bloomberg and Ray Kelly. Ray Kelly has moved the NYPD completely away from community policing, and they are in fact running the NYPD as like it's the private army of Mayor Bloomberg.
You're having a protest today, Imam Rashid, down at Foley Square here in New York City, and you're calling for the resignation of the police commissioner, Ray Kelly?
Absolutely. The police commissioner and his spokesman, Paul Brown. They have continuously, misled and lied to New Yorkers generally, and Muslim New Yorkers in particular. They've been caught in their lies, and the taxpayers of New York are not paying them to lie to us about what they're doing. So we're calling for their resignation.
We want to thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Matt Apuzzo in Washington, D.C., reporter for the Associated Press, co-author of the new AP report called Document Shows NYPD Eyed Shiites Based on Religion, and Imam Talib Abdur-Rashid of the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood and president of the Islamic Leadership Council of New York. He'll be at Foley Square today at 3 o'clock in New York City. That's the courts area of New York, leading the protests. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.